Allied invasion has started. The news to this moment is all supplied by the enemy. The Germans, through the Berlin radio, tell us that the invasion, that's the enemy's word for it, has started. There is no Allied confirmation. Shortly after 1 a.m. Eastern Wartime, Columbia's shortwave listening station heard the Berlin radio make this announcement, quote, "Here is a special bulletin. Early this morning, the long-awaited British and American invasion began when paratroops landed in the area of the Somme estuary. The harbor of Le Havre," the Berlin broadcast went on, "is being fiercely bombarded at the present moment. Naval forces of the German Navy are off the coast fighting with enemy landing vessels. We have just brought you a special bulletin." End quote. That was a German radio bulletin. We repeat it for you. It was heard by Columbia's shortwave listening station at the beginning of Berlin's 1 a.m. Eastern Wartime news broadcast to North America. It was repeated in the middle of the program, and there is no confirmation from any Allied source. In fact, the War Department in Washington says it has absolutely no information on these German radio reports. Here's a bulletin from London. Shortly before 1 a.m. Eastern Wartime, the BBC broadcast the Allied High Command's urgent instructions to Holland, advising all people living within 18 miles of the coast to leave their homes immediately and also to keep off roads, railways, and bridges. This may have been another of the series of instructions the Allied High Command has given the people of Europe. The German-controlled Paris radio at 12:45 Eastern Wartime did not mention any invasion in its news bulletins. The Associated Press recorded a German radio broadcast with the same so-called invasion news.
It's 7 a.m. on D-Day, and no paratroopers have landed at the Somme estuary, but many have in western Normandy. And by now, half a dozen waves of landing craft have already beached their men on the U.S. First Army's beaches, Utah and Omaha.
Now come the British and Canadian Second Army landings further east. There's so much happening at once that we're going to let you follow the reports without interruption. We first return to the Rangers and their attack on Pointe du Hoc.
With the landing craft of Rudder's three companies coming in on the east flank of Pointe du Hoc, instead of approaching the tip from the front, the original plan to land on both sides is no longer realistic. So Rudder decides all three will land on the east side of the pont. So Dog, Easy, and Fox Company landing craft get into position to land along a strip of rocky beach about 500 by 30 meters. As I said, the beach has been cratered by the naval bombardment, and the high shell holes and the mounds and heaps of earth and stone torn from the cliff face present serious obstacles to the landing. The duck V's are basically useless. None of them can get close enough to the base of the cliffs, so they cannot use the extension ladders. This did not deter the enterprising Staff Sergeant William I. Stevenson from extending his ladder 90 feet, climbing up, and hosing the Germans with the twin Lewis guns mounted on top. Swinging precariously like a metronome, he fired his weapons in the general direction of his foes, who would have caught the odd glimpse of the unfortunate Ranger swinging through 45 degrees, a surreal, if not comic, sight. The first craft to land is Rudder's. The landings go off between 7:05 and 7:08, but they are nearly 40 minutes behind schedule, and this brings with it a host of new problems. For starters, the Germans have had 45 minutes to recover from the naval bombardment, but also the Rangers are supposed to send out the code word crowbar when they land and bingo when they have climbed the pont. The assault plan had called for Schneider, with the other Ranger companies, to wait until 7 for the signal to come, right? If no signal has been received by 7, though, Schneider is to head over and land at Omaha Dog Beach, and then move overland to destroy the guns of Pointe du Hoc from that side. Knowing how critical reinforcement might be to the three assault companies, though, at 7, Schneider delays, hoping for the signal that a successful landing has been made. Well, no signal comes because Rudder's crew is under heavy fire and has just begun the climb. There's also the fact that the radio sets are waterlogged and won't work until they've been taken apart and dried out. So, having received no signal, Schneider heads eastward towards Omaha Beach. As for Rudder's force, the destruction of the cliffs may have made the landings more difficult, but it does make the climb easier. And though Rudder has lost a lot of men, He gains 2 more, those 2 paratroopers Crouch and Goodgull, who bailed out of their C-47 hours ago. He's also got 3 British divers from the latter Duck Vs. They've abandoned their useless ships, and they join the Rangers for the climb. They'll even go back down under fire when ammo runs low to get machine guns later. At 7:15, Satterlee provides close fire support against German troops appearing along the cliff. As for the climb itself, attempts to scale the cliff with the J projectors on the LCA had mixed results. The long trip to the beach and the heavy swell had soaked most of the ropes and made them heavier than usual. As a result, when the rockets were fired, the grapnels often failed to reach the top of the cliffs. Of the 54 J projectors on the LCAs, only 19 grapnels were successfully launched over the cliff's edge. So that's a problem. But on the other hand, the gouges in the cliffs caused by the shelling allow the men to use the metal ladders they've brought along. And also, some of the grapnels that do reach the top have burning fuses. So the Germans don't cut the ropes because they think they're explosives. Overall, German resistance to the actual landings is relatively light, partly from the casualties inflicted by the bombardment and the naval gunfire, plus the displacement of many of the gun crews outside the perimeter to the south. And with Satterlee now blasting any sign of movement, some enemy troops remain in craters or trenches and just lob grenades over the cliff. So in general, even with wet and slippery ropes, the men make the climb easily enough. And at first, the fighting at the top is sporadic. At the tip of the Pointe, those men from Easy Company engage the observation post, which has not been damaged and whose occupants are firing a machine gun. 3 grenades through the observation and firing slits make the machine gun stop firing. But small arms fire continues. Meanwhile, without knowing of each other's presence, more of Easy Company is attacking the observation post from the opposite side. They have driven a German who's been throwing grenades under the cliffs under cover, and after hearing the Germans make radio calls, they shoot the radio antenna off the top of the OP, thus isolating it. Those last up the ropes hurry to join their companies. The Rangers break into groups at the top to assault each of the guns they believe are there thanks to the maps and photographs they use for training. But the guns are not there. At 7:28, radio communication is established between Satterlee and the Rangers. From then until the evening, the log of the Satterlee is a repetitious recital of commenced firing and ceased firing, target destroyed. A U.S. Navy report states the longest interval between salvos during the day was a 20-minute pause when the crew tried to eat K rations. Before they finished, the Rangers had again called for shelling and the meal was interrupted. Other heavier equipment than the radio soon makes it ashore and up the cliff. At 7:45, Rudder moves his command post from the base of the cliffs to a shell crater at the top. The doctor does the same with the aid station, though a medic is left on the beach to help those seriously wounded who need evacuation and cannot go up. It is total chaos on Omaha Beach. 3 companies have been cut down in the blink of an eye, and many survivors paralyzed by the sudden eruption of carnage. Some run forward, trying to get to the end of the beach, while others drop behind beach obstacles to find some cover. But the tide is rising, so these obstacles will soon be submerged. One thing that somewhat saves 2 companies of the 1/16th from annihilation is the heavy smoke from the burning grass ignited by the naval bombardment. Another is that, unlike to the west at Veerville, the German pillboxes at Les Moulins have been built perpendicular to the advance, which means they are incapable of delivering the devastating flanking fire. Also, one thing the men of Company A totally lacked was the support of tanks. Here at Les Moulins, the Shermans of the 743rd Tank Battalion are moving in and returning fire. Men follow close behind them, trying to find cover behind the armor from which the bullets ping, ping, ping. Those lucky enough to make it to the end of the beach huddle down at the base of the embankment. The shingle here grades to 2 meters high and offers at least some cover from enemy rifle fire. But as soon as the Germans can train their mortars on the closely huddled groups of men, there will be more casualties. The tanks are not the game changer that everyone is hoping for, and so many of them did not even reach the beaches. And as long as the Germans have their anti-tank guns in place, Those machines are easy prey as they move slowly over the soft sand. 4 tanks were moving in single file parallel to the beach. Suddenly one of them burst into flames. An instant later, a second, and then the third was afire. The fourth one backed up and returned to the water's edge. I actually saw the steam, not smoke, from the machine gun that was firing at our Duck V from the top of the hill behind the beach. Officers of G Company are trying to get their men to move along the shingle to the beach sector on their right, thinking that if they get to their planned landing point between Vierville and Les Moulins, they might have a better chance. The Germans see this and lay down heavy fire. There is no room to maneuver. With a seemingly invincible enemy atop the bluffs, holding the commanding heights on either side of Les Moulins, there is little they can do but hide at the shingle embankment. Soon the follow-up waves of the 1/16th will arrive. But will this kickstart the assault or just worsen an unfolding disaster? I mean, the enemy here is not actually that far away beyond the embankment, just a grenade throw, really. From inside a 3-story building, the Germans scan the beach ahead of them. A machine gun fires from one of the lower stories, with bullets spraying just above the heads of the Americans at the embankment. Storming the building head-on would be the only option. But even that has been made impossible by 2 coils of tightly strung barbed wire still totally intact. At the same time, at the eastern end of Omaha, the 16th Infantry Regiment of the 1st Division is still engaged in a desperate and increasingly hopeless struggle for the Colleville draw. The German positions are simply too strong, set up in unreachable and barely visible positions on top of the lengthy bluffs. Like the crescent of a sickle, they enjoy an almost perfect field for crossfire. No American can make a move without the defenders noticing. The mission of the 16th is straightforward. Cross the beach and seize the Saint Laurent and Colleville draws. Any remaining opposition after the bombardment is to be eliminated. Straightforward. But here as well, much now depends on the failed results of the bomber squadrons, as Omaha's eastern side provides even less cover than the 1/16th is trying to use in the west. The scene that unfolds in front of the second wave at Omaha is pretty much universal, though. Burning and wrecked LCTs often further bar the still uncleared lanes through the beach obstacles. Many men drop into the chest-deep water as they step off their landing ramps or hurl themselves over the edges of their craft. This is especially cumbersome and dangerous for the heavy weapons squads and mortar teams, who are often unable to carry their waterlogged equipment to the water's edge. They also must wade among the many floating dead as the waves of the rising tide begin to push further up the beach. Around 45 minutes after H hour, the first bits of information about what is happening at the shoreline filter back to command. They speak of unexpectedly tough German resistance, of the complete failure of the Air Force to destroy or sabotage the invasion site, and to the appalling number of casualties littering the beaches. This prompts General Giroux, and indeed Schaeff, to ask the big question. Should they keep reinforcing Omaha Beach in the hopes of achieving a breakthrough, or concede defeat there? For now, High Command decides to push on and keep the waves of men coming in as planned. No modifications, no alterations. There must be soft spots, weaknesses, chinks in the armor. Someplace along this godforsaken beach has to be breachable. By now, 2 more companies of the 116th, B and D, have begun to land in front of the Vierville draw, unaware of the slaughter of Company A. About 1,000 meters from the beach, the British coxswains drop the ramps. It's tough to see much of what is going on in front of them, but there are bodies, lots of bodies, and there will be more as the men of the second wave exit their ships and immediately come under heavy fire from an unseen enemy, entrenched somewhere on those bluffs beyond the beach. When the ramp went down, mortar shells were hitting on both sides of us. Machine guns were all over the top of us, just like you were in a bee's nest. The captain was the first man to get off the boat, and he was hit on the ramp and fell into the water. Sergeant Wright was next off, followed by the first aid man. I was fourth off the boat. The sea was rough, the ramp banged up and down, and I caught my heel and went over the side into the water. When I got up, Captain Zappacosta was up and calling to me, "I'm hit!" He went down, and I did not see him come up. To this day, I have found no one who got off that boat alive but me, and I have looked everywhere. some of the veteran Royal Navy LCA crews have been briefed for such an emergency. In the face of the enemy fire ahead of them, they maneuver their vessels to the side, trying to find a softer spot to land. It is such flexibility that is very much needed at Omaha. And there are some lucky landings within all this carnage as well. One single boat from 16th Infantry's Company E was separated from the other 5 landing craft, as I said before, and was beached halfway between the Saint Laurent and Colville draws. Driven on by enemy machine gun fire, the boat team under 2nd Lieutenant John Spaulding hastily sprinted toward the shingle. Here they are secure, at least temporarily, but soon must make a fateful decision. Do they stay or do they go up the bluffs? An hour into the invasion, the situation in the west demands a decision too. Things don't look good in any of Omaha's sectors, but that of the 116th Infantry opposite the Vierville draw is desperate. The better parts of 3 companies have been destroyed, and there are no reports that any effort can be undertaken to clear the beach obstacles there before the rising tide makes that impossible. Is there any point in bringing in more landing craft to that sector? The beachmasters of the Navy decide no, that it is fruitless, suicidal even, to keep directing more men to this killing zone. So any further landings toward the Vierville draw are to be immediately suspended. On the one hand, this does of course prevent unnecessary deaths, but this also means that the men already stranded there on Dog Green sector will be left on their own. The 29th Division begins immediately rerouting their units. Company C of the 116th is diverted 1,000 meters further to the east towards Dog White. Here, 200 men under Captain Berthier Hawks come in between the Vierville and Les Moulins draws. However, as the boats near touchdown, the surf makes them violently rise and plunge, craft teeter and then turn on their sides, spilling men and equipment into the water. All the heavy equipment, flamethrowers, demolition charges, Bangalore torpedoes, all lost. The surviving men suddenly find themselves on a small beach, not even 100 meters wide, and directly under some of Omaha's most daunting bluffs. Captain Hawks comes to the conclusion that to get off the beach, they have to get up the bluffs. Sure, this will be anything but easy as the bluffs are a natural deterrent, but the Germans will most likely think this as well. So the defenses will be much lighter at the top. Hoping this is true, Company C begins climbing the bluffs. So the first hour at Omaha Beach has not gone well, with so much chaos and confusion caused by the ferocity of the unanticipated German resistance and with the men on the beach left without the means to deal with these defenses. The realization that the first wave at Utah Beach has not landed where they were supposed to presents not just a minor inconvenience. This might jeopardize the whole plan. The 8th Regiment has a pre-planned route to the causeways and to reach certain objectives and landmarks according to a specific timetable. I mean, it's the first hour of the invasion that is most critical, and not just for the soldiers and sailors, but for the engineers and logistical troops as well, whose job it is to expand the beachhead, set up an actual landing zone, and build roads and communications inland. The subsequent waves also run on tight schedules, and shifting the whole invasion zone to a different place might throw everything into disarray, even without the interference of the enemy. Not to mention that the paratroopers are expecting them to land further north, opposite causeways 3 and 4, not 1 and 2, as they have done. There was a house by the seawall where none should have been, were we in the right place. It was imperative that I should find out where we were in order to set the maneuver. I scrambled up on the dunes and was lucky in finding a windmill which I recognized. We'd been put ashore a mile too far to the south. The first waves at Utah Beach are indeed far further to the south than planned, around 1,000 to 1,500 meters to the left, most likely caused by a blend of human and natural interference. This means that the carefully planned routes and rehearsed maneuvers are no longer valid. However, the essential premise of the plan hasn't changed. The GIs still have to get off the beach and still have to reach the causeways. The question that presents itself to the junior officers on the ground is now twofold. Should they march northwards and try to relocate themselves to the landing zone intended, or should they adapt the plan to the situation at hand and simply move inland from where they are now. They take the initiative and move inland towards the causeways, ready to eliminate any enemy opposition in their path. The men quickly ascend the steep sand dunes and encounter the first enemy face to face. In and around the surviving pillboxes, the Germans have hastily set up some makeshift resistance nests and machine gun positions. This is men of the static 709th Fortress Division, a third-rate outfit at best. Most of them are still stunned by the preliminary bombardment too, and now they find themselves isolated and about to be overwhelmed by their enemy. With most of their heavy weapons destroyed, and without any hope for reinforcements or any support by the Luftwaffe, they are not that motivated to resist for long. The Americans also begin blowing gaps in the barbed wire with Bangalore torpedoes, destroying pillboxes with satchel charges, and firing bazooka rounds against bunkers. The coastal defenses here are concentrated on 5 strongpoints in a checkerboard pattern. 3 of these are placed directly on and just behind the dunes. The other 2 are like 700 meters further back. In theory, these strongpoints are connected by trenches and sealed off by barbed wire and minefields. The preliminary bombardment has, however, destroyed much of this cohesion. Still, a highly motivated and properly supplied defender could have made an assault on the strongpoints very costly and very time-consuming for the attackers. This is not the case here, as the 709th Fortress Division quickly crumbles as the 8th Regiment infiltrates their positions. Spearheaded by Companies E and F of the 2nd Battalion under Lieutenant Colonel Carlton McNeely, these 600 GIs make short work of the defenders of the 2 southern strongpoints. As soon as the Germans saw us coming over the seawall, they started firing mortars and 88s at us. We deployed out. Scouts were out ahead, and I was with the CO. 2 houses just ahead of us had snipers in them, but we took these Germans with BARs. As I was moving back, the 3rd wave was coming in, and the first tanks as well, about 25 or 30 of them. Company F continues to advance further inland. Their next target is a strongpoint located on a small farm known as La Dune. Again, the Germans do not put up much of a fight before being overwhelmed. A group of the enemy surrendered, walking out with their hands up. These were the first we had ever seen. They were armed to the hilt, so I pulled out my trench knife and proceeded to cut all their web equipment from their bodies. One German soldier hit the panic button and ran toward the beach. I suppose half the company put bullets into him, thinking he was trying to get away. Although the whole invasion plan is immensely complex and detailed, as you can see, on the ground here, it comes down to pushing forward until they reach the end of the beach. And once companies G and H have landed, and the 2nd Battalion is nearly full strength, the Americans set out to do exactly that. Companies E and F will turn and head inland, moving parallel to the coast for about 700 meters. Companies G and H will take out the 3rd major strongpoint, a place called Beaugillot. Beaugillot is another large farm, but here, the Germans are much more willing to put up a fight. Company G, under Captain Haley, finds itself immediately under machine gun fire and blocked by a minefield. But after a display of superior firepower, they are able to overcome the enemy. By now, Sherman tanks have reached the beach in considerable numbers, and since there isn't really a target for them to shoot at there, they begin moving over the shallow surf and towards the seawall. Once a path is opened by the 237th Engineer Battalion, the tanks begin moving down towards the beach exit, which will eventually lead them towards Saint-Marie-du-Mont. At 7:30, although still in the wrong place, the 2nd wave begins landing at Utah more or less just as scheduled. Now, an hour into the invasion, the pendulum here has drastically swung towards the attackers. The Germans, and more often their auxiliaries from the east, are not putting up much determined resistance and are instead surrendering in droves. The fresh 1st Battalion of the 8th Infantry Regiment under Lieutenant Colonel Conrad Simmons now takes over from what the 2nd Battalion started. Their job now is overcoming the remaining 3 German strongpoints and then pushing northwards towards the causeways to make contact with the airborne units. In trying to capture Saint-Marie-du-Mont, the Americans are in for a fight. All throughout these past early morning hours, the paratroopers of the 101st have been pretty heavily engaged in and around the town. street to street, house to house, desperately trying to wrest control from the stubborn defenders. Even the gloomy interior of the ancient church of Église Notre Dame has seen violent eruptions of gunfire and hand grenades. But at the same time, just outside of Saint-Marie-du-Mont, in the hedgerows and apple orchards of the outskirts, there is an equal amount of small unit action, since the airborne troops here are trying to envelop the enemy from the sides, a double envelopment. Here, the German artillerymen of the 91st have entrenched themselves in 3 independent fighting positions. These are located in a semicircle, north, west, and south of Saint-Marie-du-Mont. Each has a battery of 4 105mm howitzers that can and do fire straight onto Utah Beach. It is now the job of Robert Sink's 506 PIR to silence these guns as quickly as possible. But remember, Sink has spent all night just trying to find his men, and has only assembled a small fraction of his headquarters units and William Turner's 1st Battalion. His 3rd Battalion, whose commander Wolverton died before reaching the ground, is still engaged in heavy fighting several miles to the south for the possession of the bridges over the Douve River. Though Sink has no idea this is going on. He also has no idea about the whereabouts of Robert Strayer's 2nd Battalion, whose actual orders it is to assault and capture Saint-Marie-du-Mont. But they landed several kilometers to the north. Left without much of a choice, Sink now must accomplish what he can with the small remnant of the 1st Battalion, an outfit originally designated as the Regimental Reserve for Unanticipated Emergencies. Well, this is about as much of an emergency as it can get. The 3 batteries they are about to assault are not located on any of their maps. Allied intelligence failed to spot them beforehand. The Germans have done well camouflaging their existence from the eyes of recon planes, and it isn't until the 1st paratroopers literally stumble upon them that they are aware of the strong German presence outside Saint-Marie-du-Mont. After some recon of his own, Sink singles out the battery west of the town as their first objective. Called Oldie, after the small hamlet nearby, this battery is near a couple of stone farmhouses, which give the Americans a clear target. Around 75 men of Company C move in to attack from as many sides as possible. Our machine gun was set up in the road, and one belt fired at the position. The fire caused the German gun crews to leave their pieces and take cover in the surrounding ditches, and the howitzers were thereafter not fired by the enemy. The 2 flanking elements moved forward while the machine gun fired short bursts. Both flanking units crossed the road at the same time and advanced towards the entrances to the ditch, throwing grenades. The enemy threw grenades back. The defenders gave little resistance once the trench was entered, because the blast of the rockets from one flank and the continual concussion of grenades from the other took most of the fight out of the artillerymen. Later, we found the bodies of several parachutists who had landed within the enemy position. Although the German artillerymen have the advantage of entrenched positions, they have fatally neglected to do their own reconnaissance. Their lack of enemy scouts allows the Americans to close in on them and attack from different sides at the same time. The fight for the batteries is actually an excellent case study in small unit infantry tactics. 50 or 60 Germans defending the area had all pulled back to within the gun position. The force started a double envelopment, Patch moving around one flank with half the men, while Raudstein and the remaining men started a sweep around the hedgerows on the other. But while they were busy in this turning movement, a man with a bazooka opened up on the battery, firing from a hedgerow directly in front of the guns. The rockets hit among the men and ammunition with terrible effect. All fight died in the survivors. The 2 groups under Patch and Raudstein were able to close in and destroy them with rifle fire. A ditch behind the guns was choked with enemy dead when the ground was overwhelmed. With the battery at Oldie under attack, some men from the 506 PIR keep the German units inside the town occupied. Mortar rounds rain down on the town center, one even destroying the steeple dome of the church, from which the defenders are reportedly directing their artillery fire. Also, at the same time, another mixed bag of American paratroopers enters the vicinity of Saint-Marie-du-Mont. Surprise, surprise, these men are part of Strayer's lost 2nd Battalion, finally arriving on the scene. This small group spent the night escaping the marshy pastures south of Andouville, and began following the road towards the high ground at the village of Le Grand Chemin. They have now spotted the German artillery position close to an old manor house named Brécourt, around a kilometer north of Saint-Marie-du-Mont. A small detachment of 11 men under First Lieutenant Dick Winters is sent into the bocage to flush the enemy out. First thing I did was have everybody drop all equipment except ammunition and grenades, for that's all we'd need if things went good or bad. Then I placed one of my 2 machine guns in a position where he could give us a little covering fire as we went more or less into position. We'll see soon enough how it goes for them. 6 airborne divisional signals from Les Baux de Ranville managed to make contact with 1st Corps at 7:16 a.m. and live contact with 4th Brigade. At 7:55, they established contact with Britain. By 7 a.m., the British 3rd Division was landing at Sword Beach. Okay, well, not just yet, but soon they will be. And the big naval gunfire had lifted to start pounding on Caen, en route to passing over D Company's position. They sounded so big, Howard says, and being poor bloody infantry, we had never been under naval fire before, and those damn great shells came sailing over, such a size that you automatically ducked, even in the pillbox, as one went over, and my radio operator was standing next to me, very perturbed about this, and finally Corporal Tappenden said, "Blimey, sir, they're firing jeeps." The attacks on the beaches are underway, and the bridges operation is very much connected to the landings on Sword Beach. 7:20, end of naval bombardment on Gold, Juno, and Sword. 5th East Yorkshires and 6th Green Howards, 69th Brigade's assault battalions, soon will begin making rough landings from heavy seas. They are also hit by snipers and mortars. 4 teams of obstacle clearance units are to land and clear beach and shallow obstacles. They wear wetsuits and carry explosives. 7:25, H hour at Gold. The aerial and naval bombardment, which should have knocked out the defenses at Les Hamel, fails completely, with the result that heavy opposition is met from strong points on the seawall. Very few underwater obstacles have been cleared, with the result that many landing craft are damaged and beached far out, causing heavy losses in vehicles. 7:30. The troops are really hitting the beaches now. The DDs are supposed to be the vanguard, but they're released much closer to the shore than the planned 5 kilometers because of rough and choppy seas. So they're delayed quite a bit, and that causes instant confusion. See, they reach the beach the same time as the infantry and just ahead of all the specialized armor from 79th Armored Division. Another reason why the enemy positions are still well defended. All of these crafts jostled together for landing space and weaved alarmingly through the underwater obstacles which had broken through the surface of the water. The orderly lines of craft that had plowed relentlessly toward the French shore for the past 6 miles now broke up as each vessel made its own final run-in and attempted to touch down safely. Here and there, craft hit mines mounted on poles, and great waterspouts shot up from beneath the ships. Others swung crazily over as steel hedgehogs ripped jagged holes in their hulls. All around them, the air zipped and crackled with bullets as the Germans opened fire on the invaders. On Jig Green, a 900-meter stretch of sand just east of Les Hamel, the 1st Hampshires are on the right and the 1st Dorsets on the left. Their orders are to capture the beach and move inland, but as you may guess, it isn't that easy. The Hampshires are to swing west and take Les Hamel and Asnel. The Dorsets to hit the Custom House strongpoint and sweep around to the high ground overlooking Arromanches. Ken Ford sums up the actual situation in reality in one sentence. As the landing craft approached the beach, it soon became clear that something had gone badly wrong. Yep. See, 231st Brigade expects to land on a beach whose major strongpoints have been taken care of. But the Hampshires and Dorsets take heavy fire immediately. The DD tanks are supposed to be blasting a path for the infantry too, but they're still either slowly wading ashore around obstacles or getting out of the way of the landing craft. The Hampshires land, companies A and B, close to Les Roquettes and right near the customs house. So they now attack what's supposed to be the Dorsets' first objective. A Company is pinned down on the beach by murderous fire from this strongpoint, 2 pillboxes and concealed machine gun posts at the edge of Roquette, and fire sweeping the beach from Les Hamel. One platoon on the left manages to reach the flank of the pillboxes and shuts them up, so that the rest can storm the wire perimeter, taking out the garrison and start getting off the deadly beach. A few words about the fire sweeping the beach from Les Hamel here. That is coming from around the sanatorium there. The building itself has been fortified and has a bunch of weaponry. And down at the seafront, it has an H612 casemate with a big 75mm gun that can hit the whole beach to the east. It also has reinforced concrete sides, so it's been impregnable to the naval gunfire so far today. There are also Tobruks with machine guns and mortars all over there, so the Germans there are safe behind concrete and have a big field of fire. 7:35. The first troops of Royal Engineer breaching squads reached the beach, as well as Churchill AVRE tanks, Sherman flail tanks, and armored bulldozers with the goal of clearing minefields and obstacles. So the LCTs are now landing, but most of them land far to the east of their designated landing zones. One does land where it's supposed to, but it's hit by the big gun at Les Hamel shooting off its bow. The leading AVRE carrying a roly-poly tries to disembark anyhow, but the roly-poly hits an obstacle which jams it and the AVRE in the exit from the craft. Roly-polies are carried on top of AVREs, and they're dropped to unroll and lay a track over soft ground so the AVREs don't sink. They use steel roller shuttering. Bobbins do the same thing, but using reinforced fabric matting. They also have AVREs that carry fascines, bundles of rods or sticks, also to be put down for the vehicle to advance over ditches, craters, and stuff like that. Tanks are drowning in the water or destroyed on the beach. One Sherman Crab does manage to flail its way through the dunes into the lateral road, but when it turns toward Les Hamel, the 75 knocks it out too. The Germans also have inland artillery helping out as well, including 88mm guns from afar. They turn the beach into an inferno. And at 7:50, companies C and D land right in it. C on the right and D on the left. It is total chaos. Lieutenant Colonel Nelson Smith, the commanding officer, is hit twice, so he's evacuated. Major Martin, second in command, has not landed yet, so Major Warren takes charge. Spoiler, when Major Martin makes it ashore 2 hours from now, he is killed immediately by a sniper. But there are other important casualties as well. The forward observation officer for the support ships is wounded, as is a field artillery battery commander, so they have no way of calling in fire support from the destroyers or from the self-propelled artillery circling around offshore. The AVREs on the beach all seem to have been knocked out. We did not find the gaps we expected. The beach was raked with enfilading fire, and there was an anti-tank gun in a concrete and steel emplacement in Les Hamel. The Germans did not show much sign of giving up. I realized we should have to gap our way through ourselves. Using Bangalores, which we had with us, casualties began to pile up. While gapping our way off the beach, I saw the officer commanding limping badly. He told me to take command of the battalion. A company, who should have landed close to Les Hamel, climbed the seawall, and silenced the opposition, had almost ceased to exist. The 1st Dorsets have the opposite of the Hampshire's luck, not landing right in front of the guns where they were supposed to, but to the east. Still taking heavy fire though, again from that 75 gun at Les Hamel. As armor support, they have C Squadron from Sherwood Rangers, who lose 7 tanks in the surf and at the beach. AVREs from 6th Assault Regiment RE, flails from Westminster Dragoons that have all sorts of problem and destruction of their own. 1 flail and 1 AVRE both managed to set off mines while trying to create an exit lane from the beach and block it, for example. The Dorsets do manage to get off the beach quicker than the Hampshires, though. They cross the marshy ground and will form up behind Les Roquettes. The plan is to bypass Les Hamel and head for Bourg. We'll see more of this over the coming hour. As for the landings on King Red, the leading elements come ashore beginning at 7:30. Now, the DD support was supposed to be launched at 6:40, so they'd have 50 minutes to get to shore ahead of the infantry. But it was just too rough to launch the DDs at all, so they land them right on the beach. The LCTs carrying the armor approach the beach in single file, sort of, and there's not nearly as much concentrated enemy fire during landing as there is against the guys to the west. However, once the tanks and things get on the beach, they are in great danger. See, at the other end of Gold, at La Riviere, at the east of the landings, is a casemate like the one at Les Hamel. This H677 casemate is also protected from the seaward side by reinforced concrete, and it too has a gun that can fire all along the beach, but to the west instead of the east. But it's not a 75 gun, it's an 88 millimeter gun. Yep, one of those deadly babies. And it starts taking out the flails, AVREs, and DDs one by one. The 5th East Yorks come ashore just west of this, and they take very heavy fire. They have to use the seawall as cover. The situation gradually improves as more of the crab flails and AVREs manage to get further ashore. 2 crabs fire on the 88 gun and put it out of action. They then flail through the minefield to the lateral road, turn right as planned to go through the north-south minefield leading up to Montfleury, but become bogged. By this time, all AVRE and Sherman crabs in what they want to be beach exit lanes 4, 5, and 6 are either out of action, bogged down, or employed in trying to recover bogged down crabs. However, they silence the 88 gun, and that's a big deal. Just FYI, many sources say it's just one crab that shoots the 88 out of action, but the after-action report says it is in fact 2. The 5th East Yorks get some help when naval guns hit the defenders in the rear of their strongpoint, and they manage to cross the seawall and make the lateral road behind the beaches. This gets them to the minefields and wire perimeter of La Riviere, which they are going to have to clear of the enemy. The 6 Green Howards take serious fire from the enemy, but not as serious as the Yorks do. They also have an easier opportunity to silence it. It is a strong point at Ableu de Hortot, and A Company keeps the defenders busy with small arms fire while 3 AVREs close in. The armor here is quite handily available. D Company leaves the beach to go and try to tackle the 4-gun battery at Montfleury. The specialized armor is actually doing pretty well here, thanks to a single crab that leaves the beach, reaches the lateral road, turns east for a bit towards La Riviere, then south towards Montfleury, flailing the whole time and clearing a path. Thanks to an AVRE with a bridge, that crab can cross a crater, but the road is now open for vehicles to Vers-sur-Mer. B and C companies land 20 minutes after A and D. By 7:50 a.m., news is sent back that the assault troops of both 69th and 231st Brigades are ashore. 69th going generally well, 231st having difficulty getting off the beach owing to enemy fire. At 7:20, the naval bombardment ends. The landings on Juno Beach begin this hour, the whole thing set back 10 minutes, as I said. Thing is, because the seas are rough with such big waves, the launching of the DD tanks is delayed until they're a lot closer to shore, as I also said. Those supporting 7th Brigade are in fact launched only about 1 kilometer out, and they both swim and drive ashore. Those supporting 8th Brigade are landed right on the beaches themselves, and the LCTs bring in the AVREs. The later arrival of the assault waves onto the beach meant that their landing craft touched down amongst the beach obstacles instead of ahead of them. On Juno, this problem was unavoidable. The combination of rocks, beach obstacles, and tide meant that there was no perfect time to land. The timing of the landings was therefore a compromise. The craft would touch down at midway between high and low tides, allowing the greatest number of beach obstacles to be visible and therefore avoidable, whilst giving the infantry and tanks the shortest area of open beach to cross. In spite of aerial bombing by both medium and heavy bombers, the naval bombardment, and the artillery shooting from the LCTs at sea, the German defenses around Juno are still very active, just waiting out the storm in concrete and steel bunkers. Then they emerge when the assault landing craft actually approach the beaches and hit them hard with machine guns and mortars. They concentrate their heavier weapons on the LCTs behind them. Note what I just said. The assault teams coming in before their armor. At Mike Green and Red, west of the harbor, the Royal Winnipeg Rifles arrive at 7:49, the first to land, before any of their armor support. That is not supposed to happen. In fact, the armor is supposed to be landed 5 minutes before the infantry. So the DDs from the 1st Hussars, the Crabs from the 22nd Dragoons, and the AVREs from the Royal Engineers are not here busy attacking the German defenses and giving covering fire to the exposed troops. The Winnipeg Rifles must fight their own way ashore, which obviously leads to high casualties. The AVREs, in fact, are a full half hour late in arriving. As the landing craft went astern after unloading, the coxswains could do nothing to prevent themselves from becoming hopelessly entangled in mines and twisted steel. 20 of the leading 24 vessels were lost or damaged, among a total of 90 out of 306 impaled on Juno that morning. Close artillery support on all of the British landings was to be provided by Royal Marines manning obsolete Centaur tanks mounting 95mm howitzers, but these proved lethally unseaworthy in landing craft. Scores capsized and were lost. Only 6 of 40 intended to support the Canadians reached the shore. Winnipeg Rifles B Company lands at the right on Mike Green and moves to take out some concrete casemates laying down enfilading fire. D Company lands on the left and tries fighting its way off the beaches through hidden machine gun nests and Tobruks. Only 7 of the DDs from A Squadron, Canadian 6th Armor Regiment, make it ashore, and some of those are swamped by the incoming tide since they're sitting on the beach firing at pillboxes. Over on the far right, C Company of the Canadian Scottish Rifles lands. They are attached to the Winnipeg Rifles at the moment. They, fortunately for them, do not face much opposition at all. They have, as a main objective, the 75mm gun at WN-33A, but when they get there, they find the naval gunfire has actually already knocked it out of action. So they're quickly off the beach and heading inland, having overrun 3 machine gun nests and persuading a prisoner to lead them through the minefield to open ground. They have the barbed wire and the mines in front of Vaux to tackle, and then they will head overland towards Sainte-Croix-sur-Mer and Bonneville. The other assault battalion from Canadian 7th Brigade is the Regina Rifle Regiment, but they have not yet landed as the hour ends. As for the 8th Brigade landings between Bernier and Saint-Aubin, that's a little more spread out by geography. At 7:55, the Queen's Own Rifles land on Nan White. The DDs are late here as well, arriving just after the 1st Infantry does. It is A and B companies that lead the assault, and they get hit straight off the bat. B is hit from WN-28, since they land right in front of Bernier, which is like 200 meters east of where they plan to land. They land in front of a seawall and a group of pillboxes, and they have to sprint across the wide beach to the only shelter under the seawall itself. The Germans are spraying the beach with machine gun fire, causing heavy casualties and leaving the beach littered with the dead. B has the misfortune of also being within range of that east-facing 88 at Courseulles. Once under cover, though, they can close in on the defense posts and hit them with grenades and Sten guns and silence them one by one. This will soon be helped a lot by the tanks coming ashore to mop up, allowing the infantry to head into Bernier. I'm going to break the timeline now for a personal story from Sand and Steel. Doug Hester with B Company takes an inscribed prayer book from one of the Germans defending pillboxes on the seawall who's just been killed. In 1950, he returns it to the German's family and gets a reply from the soldier's mother. "We lost 5 children. Ernst was our last. The war took all that we possessed, including 5 children. In this letter you find a photo of my son. Take this as a souvenir of a German comrade whom you only saw dead, but who was, in the depth of his heart, never your foe." But life does go on, even amid the carnage. There are civilians down the road waiting for a bus, and a cafe 100 meters off the beach is even open and selling wine a couple hours from now. To B Company's side, A storms ashore, also sprinting across the beach and also taking fire, but with much less intensity than B, who are running right at the guns. Most of them make it over the seawall and into the open fields beyond. It had been a hard race, as each man sought his own route to safety, but there was little security to be found on the open ground behind the beach. It was there that their worst troubles began. The area was covered in mines and being sprayed with machine gun fire. Mortars had the eastern approach to Bernier covered, and each time the troops attempted to regroup or push forward, they were forced to ground by concentrated fire or suffered casualties from the mines. In fact, A Company takes 50% casualties in the first 15 minutes of action. But I'm getting ahead of myself. They have not been ashore 15 minutes yet. 7:24 a.m. The infantry run the final few meters to the beach is in progress. The DD tanks, the 31 of 40 that have made it all the way to the shore, have touched sand and are grinding their way up to the beach. Well, those that have not had their engines drowned when their trim changes. But their guns are still pretty useful against the enemy until the tide can come in and swamp them. Seeing into the future, 23 of these DDs end up surviving the landing. 7:25, H-hour at Sword. 8th Brigade's assault companies land on Queen Red and White beaches, backed by the armor of 27th Armored Brigade and specialized tanks of 79th Armored Division. The DDs are supposed to land just before the infantry and the specialized armor, but the heavy seas have slowed their approach, and all three more or less arrive at the same time. Men begin dropping as enemy machine gun fire hits the new arrivals. On Queen White, A Company 1st South Lancs touches down by the strongpoint Cod. They take heavy casualties. The commander is killed, actually. They begin moving to their right towards Lyon-sur-Mer, clearing the houses along the beach. C Company lands beside them and attacks Cod. This is actually supposed to be hit by 2nd East Yorks. They land to the left on Queen Red. South Lancs B Company, the follow-up, lands right in front of Cod, left of where they planned, and they throw themselves into a frontal assault on the wire and concrete. They too lose their commander, and even the battalion commander is killed when he lands shortly after. As for 2nd East Yorks on Queen Red, they come under the same machine gun and mortar fire, but everyone is also taking fire from the 75 and 88 millimeter guns, enfilading them from the length of the beach from concrete casemates at the dunes. The armor is firing back at them, but it's taking some real hits. One company of York starts to help the Lancs to knock out Cod, working its way around to hit it from behind. It's a pretty fierce struggle, and they have the support of the engineers, the Shermans, and the Middlesex machine guns, but they're going to have to clear this trench by trench, and the schedule for getting off the beach is going to fall apart. Behind the infantry come in the obstacle clearing teams to get the beach in shape for the landing craft to come. You might think they have it easier than the assault squads, but their work is both exhausting and dangerous. They're working in the open, and there is plenty of gunfire along and across the beaches. They had great difficulty clearing paths through the obstacles. For each ramp, pole, steel hedgehog, and concrete tetrahedron seemed to be armed with a teller mine or an impact-detonated anti-aircraft shell. The obstacle teams worked feverishly against an incoming tide, blown on by high winds. As the minutes passed, the water gradually overwhelmed them and their work, and then the next wave arrived. It seems like the huge bombardment by air and by sea did not have the desired effect. In fact, the aerial preparation official record says most of the nearly 3,000 bombs missed the beaches entirely, mainly because of low clouds, which caused the fear of hitting the French or their own men. In a sense, some officers felt that D-Day, with its strict timetable and reliance on a massive pre-assault bombardment, was not unlike a battle of 1916 or 1917. One recalled the horror of being locked into the artillery timetables of meticulously planned large battles. These invariably left the junior commanders no scope for exploitation. If you found a gap in the enemy defenses, adherence to the artillery program, which rarely could be altered, effectively stopped any personal initiative. The Somme had cast its shadows on our artillery and armored commanders. Both genuinely believed that in their hands they had the panacea which would protect us, the infantry, from the terrible slaughter of 1916. Instead, they put us in a straitjacket. In fact, Schaeff told Rennie that he could expect as much as 80% casualties in his assault battalions. Rennie did not tell the men this. The LCTs carrying the artillery regiments have been busy blasting away at the shoreline with their 105mm guns, but they're taking heavy fire as well. Of the 18 craft that come in with the big guns next hour, 5 are wrecked by obstacles, 3 more from mines, and 6 from enemy fire. As for the sappers, none of the 8 total exit lanes from the beaches has been opened by now. It will be a full hour from H-hour before the first one is.
By Now, an increasing number of civilians across Normandy are having their first encounter with the Allied troops, often American paratroopers. American commanders have told their men to be cautious of the civilians. They fear that the people of Normandy may greet the Allies with hostility or even assist German soldiers. Understandably, the Normans are also somewhat on edge, caught between two opposing armies. Initial reactions on both sides are often a mix of surprise and suspicion. The first thing that many Normans notice is that the men are huge. Some of them call the Americans beanpoles. Others refer to them as giants or huge devils. The Americans come from the wealthiest country in the world, and years of good food and military training have made them far bigger than the French women, children, and elderly, who are often their first encounters. That's not to mention their helmets and camouflage face paintings, which obscure their faces and give the men an air of menace. But once the two sides get past their initial shock, interactions are pleasant, for the most part. In the town of Graigne on the Cotentin Peninsula, the locals have been assisting the headquarters company of the 507th Infantry Regiment of the U.S. 82nd Airborne Division. They landed close to the town shortly after 2:30 a.m. The drop was chaotic, with the C-47s flying at very low altitude and weaving hard to avoid enemy fire. The men ended up far from their intended drop zones at Amfreville. The lucky paratroopers landed on solid ground or caught up in the branches of trees. Others landed in the marais, the marshes that pockmark the peninsula. For the fortunate ones, that meant splashing around and freezing in cold water up to their thighs. For the unfortunate ones, that meant being dragged down by a soaking parachute into a watery, shallow grave. But those who land safely, or safe enough, receive a warm welcome from the townspeople. Here's how Madame Perezin remembers the morning. The morning of the 6th, after being frightened all night by the sounds of planes and explosions, I am wakened by my teaching colleague. She tells me to go down into the school courtyard, which is full of soldiers with blackened faces who are literally falling asleep. They ask each other a series of questions in English. Where are we? Are there any Germans nearby? Etc. Soon, groups of paratroopers arrive from all directions. We greet them with open arms in our homes. Those who have fallen in the swamp shiver and their teeth chatter. In all the houses, we light large wood fires and give them warm drinks. The peasants take out some cold calvados, which they had saved for this day since the beginning of the occupation. The soldiers get acquainted with the local liquor. We offer them something to eat and treat them like old friends. As for them, they take marvelous things out of their sacks. Chocolate, cakes, matches, chewing gum, cigarettes. The Americans and the Normans don't know it, but in the early hours of June 6, 1944, they're forging a bond that will last well into the 21st century.
While the French might be getting to know the Allied troops, German higher command is pretty much still in the dark about what is going on.
The units at the coast are too busy to report back. That is, if they even have any way of reporting at all. A lot of their communication capability is now cut off. Rundstedt's office and Rommel's office still operate only on the information that a series of airborne landings has happened.
But Speidel finally calls his boss in Germany at 7:30 a.m. He tells Rommel it's not confirmed that this is the big one, but Rommel decides to return immediately to France, gets dressed, and orders his car be brought around. He has a drive of 16 or 17 hours ahead of him, during which time he will be unable to communicate for the most part. Closer to the coast, a few minutes before 8 a.m., General Marx does get the news of the landings and that they are major. He realizes that the 2,000 reserves he sent out from Caen a couple hours ago were sent in the wrong direction and are desperately needed at the coast. But whether he can reach them by radio remains uncertain.
And if he can, will it make a difference? We shall see when we return for the 9th hour of D-Day.